So Arlington is so special for so many reasons. Some of them we're here to celebrate tonight. It's not every town that can claim to be the home of a celebrated American sculptor and showcase an exquisite art collection in an architecturally significant historic building, which is also the home of the Chamber of Commerce and the Cutter Gallery, all set within a public park. I mean, wow. Your presence here is proof that our art and our history and the community that we build together is important and worth preserving. So thank you so much. I'd like to recognize the generosity of our sponsors for making this celebration possible, many of whom are here with us today. Dan Johnson, one of our museum directors and trustee, he's here. Dan, thank you so much for your leadership. Oh, there he is in the back. The Dallin family, we have Ken and Betsy and Jean Dallin Doherty in the front, and the Dallins who participated in our family sponsorship. We have Glenn Doherty here and Barbara Milhender and Pat McCabe. Thank you for your dedication to the museum and for supporting us in so many ways. Thank you to our local banks and businesses who invest greatly in and care deeply about our community. Bob Hickey of Winchester Cooperative Bank, Richard Sampson of American Alarm, Steve Savarese of Century 21 Adams, Brian Feeney and Sarah O'Toole of Century Bank, Sushil Tooley of Leader Bank, Rob Myrack of Myrack Automotive Group, Bob Bose of Bose Real Estate, and Vicki Giannakis and Kelly Cronin of Watertown Savings Bank. Thank you. I would also like to thank my family and Ann Ferguson and Peter Drench for your loving support and your sponsorship of this event. And family is indeed a theme here today, if you haven't noticed. Both Rob Myrack and Bob Myrack are here, and really it's the Myrack family who donated the Jefferson Cutter House to the town of Arlington in 1998 and really made all of this possible. So if you both, I haven't seen you, but if you both are out there and can wave, okay, maybe they'll join us later. Thank you. Oh, there's Mr. Myrack. Thank you, Mr. Myrack. The restoration of the Jefferson Cutter House, a town-owned building, is the product of a fruitful collaboration between the Dallin Museum's nonprofit and the town of Arlington. The process started 3 years ago, when the museum's nonprofit acquired a grant on behalf of the town to hire architect Wendy Frontiero, who is here today, to conduct a conservation assessment of the building. The following year, thanks to the help of Arlington's former Planning and Community Development Director, Carol Kowalski, and the museum advisor, Patrick Guthrie, who's here, we successfully obtained a $65,000 Mass Historical Commission Preservation Projects Fund grant to address the building's condition issues that were outlined in Wendy's report. As is frequently the case when rehabilitating historic properties, unforeseen issues arise, and to meet the project's $200,000 price tag, the town invested in additional funds from its capital and its operating budgets and from the Community Development Block Grant Program to preserve this important cultural resource. I'd like to thank Ted Fields, who's right here, and he'll be speaking in a minute. Ted is Arlington's economic development planner, and he did a tremendous job as our project team leader. And Jennifer Raitt, the Director of Planning and Community Development, and she's right there, for your commitment and your advocacy on this project. Thanks to our project team, we had Ted, Fred Lamburn, who's our Arlington's building craftsman, Wendy Frontiero, Chris Pokley from the Olson Company, the contractor. We had Jerry Tremblay here next to me. She's a museum director. Sara Burks and Amy Taberner, the municipal board's co-chairs, the museum co-chairs. I'd also like to thank the Arlington Board of Selectmen, and we have Joe Curo here. Thank you so much, Joe, for all of your support. The Arlington Redevelopment Board, the Arlington Historical Commission, Town Manager Adam Chapdelaine, all of you for your support and guidance. And thank you to the Dallin Museum's nonprofit board and the Municipal Board of Trustees for your love of and your tireless dedication to this museum. Thank you also to our friends at the Chamber of Commerce, and I did see Beth Locke, the director of the Chamber. There she is in the back. And to our friends at the Cutter Gallery, and Chuck Luca and some of our Cutter artists are here as well, for your patience and accommodating all of the scaffolding and all of the work that was going on here. It wasn't easy sometimes. This was a tremendous team effort, and together we have built a successful model for how nonprofits and municipalities can work together to achieve their goals. We will draw on this model moving forward as we gear up for our next big project, which is the restoration of the museum's historic interiors. But we won't worry about that today. So now I'd like to introduce Ted Fields, Arlington's Economic Development Planner, to say a couple of words.
Thank you very much, Heather, for allowing me to speak. It was my honor and pleasure to spearhead the effort to redo the exterior renovations for this tremendous historic asset to the town. Again, thank you to the entire project team for creating a tremendous result. This turned out better than I ever thought possible, and it just shows what can happen when the public and the private parties pull together and work together, and something tremendous can happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ted. And our architect, Wendy Frontiero, is going to say a few words as well.
Thank you, Heather. I've had the pleasure of working with the Jefferson Cutter House, the Dallin Art Museum, and the town of Arlington for the last 2 years as we planned how to polish up this local treasure. The goal of the restoration project was to make the building envelope sound and weather tight. The work included replacing the wood roof shingles, repairing roof drainage elements, wood trim and clapboards, restoring the windows and adding exterior storm sash, and painting the exterior. Accurately represents the appearance of the house in the mid-19th century. For a bit of background, the Cutter family settled in Arlington in the 17th century and was important in the early industrial development of the town. They eventually owned 4 mill privileges and were initially involved with grain milling, but later turned to tool making and woodworking. The builder of this house, Jefferson Cutter, born in 1803, was described in the family genealogy as a millwright, turner, and edge tool maker. The Jefferson Cutter House, constructed in the 1830s, has a rather conservative architectural design for its time. 2.5 stories high with a side-gabled roof and a rear lean-to, a 5-bay facade with a center entrance. No columned porch, no pediments that were hallmarks of the newly fashionable Greek Revival style. But go inside and look at the flamboyant paint schemes in the entrance hall and on the kitchen fireplace mantel. It will make you think twice about our supposedly stodgy ancestors. And when I look at the front door of this house, I think of the great joy and pride that Jefferson Cutter must have had in creating it. All buildings have interesting stories to tell about their time and place. Historic homes, however, give us unusually direct clues to individuals and their hopes, challenges, and accomplishments. I recently came across an interesting observation. One very fine, if not exactly intentional, purpose for historic preservation is to keep dead people alive. After nearly 2 centuries, Jefferson Cutter's personality still shines through this house. Saving a building like this helps each of us connect with eternity. For their important roles in the restoration of the Jefferson Cutter House, many people were involved in a myriad of absolutely essential ways. Jennifer Raitt, Fred Lamburn, Patrick Guthrie, Jerry Tremblay, Sara Burks, Bill Finch, and Carol Kowalski, among others. I would especially like to thank Ted Fields for genially shepherding the bureaucratic process, and Chris Piccoli of the Olson Construction Company, who was a conscientious and cooperative partner. Greatest thanks go to Heather Leavell, the director and curator of the Art Museum, who volunteered cheerfully whenever anything needed doing, even if it was not in her job description, and often it was not, and who did everything she said she would do, both skillfully and diplomatically. Congratulations to the town of Arlington for a job well done and an important part of history preserved for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. And last but not least, Jerry Tremblay would like to say a few words. She's one of the founders of the museum, and she's a member of the municipal and the nonprofit boards.
I want to thank so many people who made this happen. All of you who collaborated on a fabulous restoration of the Jefferson Cutter House. So talented. All our supporters and donors who advance the vitality of the museum in its collections, events, and programs by your support. So generous. All our guests who came to celebrate the success of the restored Jefferson Cutter House and the collaboration of the town of Arlington and the Dallin Museum. So loyal. Thank you to our board of directors who have worked constantly, to our board of trustees who brought the energy needed to bring this evening together, and last but not least, our unsung hero, Heather Leavell, who had the foresight to have the museum and the town ally for the preservation of this unique architectural gem in Arlington Center for our community's enjoyment. Thank you, Heather, you're my hero. And thank you, everybody.
James McGaw had a barbershop on Mass Ave. Do you know about James McGaw and his barbershop?
Yes, I do.
Okay, maybe they don't. And he had pictures of Dallin statues in his barbershop window because it was his dream to have a museum for Dallin's work that he knew was in Arlington and other places too. Because Arlington is the way Arlington is, people got together and worked hard. James was a real bulldog, making sure that Dallin and art was recognized in town.
About 25 years ago, maybe, I first learned about Cyrus Dallin when I believe they were just starting up a museum or thought about starting up a museum. And I became enamored of Mr. Dallin and his story very quickly, and I thought, geez, this is something that I'd like to contribute to. And that was 25 years ago, and it was the very first contribution I ever made to a nonprofit of any kind, and it was this museum.
Why do you think having a Dallin Museum here is important for the people of Arlington?
It's a connection to history. It allows us to continue living the past history of the town of Arlington, bring it into the present day, and to have someone as famous as Cyrus Dallin, who chose Arlington to live for so many years and make it his home, for those of us who choose to live here for the same reason, I think it's really nice.
And it's extraordinary that our town has more than 50 of his sculptures in its public buildings, and there's only one other museum of his work in Springvale, Utah. This is really a major cultural asset.
So why I'm here is because I'm very interested in 19th century sculpture, and I've certainly spent a lot of time looking at sculpture. And Dallin is our local hero, and I feel like he's neglected, and people need to know more about his work. And I have always thought that the museum is a bit crowded and needs more space for the sculpture for people to appreciate it, and I hope more people will come to see it.
And can you tell us how the renovation came to be and why they decided to restore the outside of the building?
Sure. So the roof was in terrible condition. It hadn't been replaced in years, and it was a wood shingle roof. It still is, but it was really letting water in, and desperately needed to be repaired. There were also problems at the gutters, and so water was leaking into the building and endangering both the structure of the building and the collections inside. So we wrote a grant application to the state, to the Massachusetts Historical Commission, and we're lucky enough to get funding through that, and that required the town to match the funds. So through community development block grants and other sources of funding, the town matched the state funds, and together came out with a really good product to repair the roof, the gutters, repair trim and clapboards, and put historic paint colors on the house. So we're really pleased with the result.
Well, the renovation is just wonderful, that it's going to be preserved for, future generations of people living here in Arlington, and I just think people should take the time to come and see it and learn about it.
And how were you guys able to match the historical look of the building?
Right. There was an architect who's also a preservation consultant, Wendy Frontiero, and so she was the technical consultant for the project. And there was also a historic paint color analysis done, taking little chips of paint off of the building and looking at them under a microscope. And so the yellow colors and the black windows and all of that, that was actually a paint scheme that was on the house in the mid-19th century, and so it was fun to bring those colors back to the house and have a change that everybody can, take notice of and say, oh, something's happened there.
We think this is a great activity, and that it's really important to support what's going on in the town. They've done a great job doing the building over, and Arlington has so many historical buildings and has such a rich history. We think it's great to support that.
And the Cyrus Dallin is one of the most important institutions in the town. Cyrus Dallin is world-renowned, did wonderful sculptures around the world. And this is a great day to celebrate the museum and the exterior renovations of the new Jefferson Cutter house. It was great, and we're happy to be one of the sponsors of the event today.
We're from Carlisle, and we're here supporting the event and just the fabulous museum that's here in Arlington.
Well, I actually grew up in Arlington, and so I've been familiar with these buildings and known about them, my entire life. In fact, I worked as a social worker in the 70s in the Whittemore House before they refurbished it. It's part of my growing up here, and part of being an Arlingtonian to support it.
Well, we happen to own a Dallin piece. It's Massasoit #1, and we have it on loan to the museum. So we kind of a vested interest in the museum itself. Massasoit 1, the sculpture down in Plymouth is probably an 8-foot bronze of Massasoit. Massasoit 1, #1, because there was a #2, another study. It's a plaster relief, so it stands about 36 inches high, and oftentimes artists would create pieces like this, and then they would sell them to subscribers sometimes in order to pay for the final piece.
So it
It's
starts
not.
as clay.
It starts as clay, and then this is a plaster relief, and then bronzes were made from this. It's unknown where this particular piece fits in that entire process, but it was cast in Woburn at Caproni Studios, so it has a Massachusetts kind of flavor to it as well. And we're really thrilled to be able to share the piece with everybody. And I think that as we've come to know more and more about Dallin, Cyrus Dallin, I think that so many people just aren't aware of his contributions to art. And when you stop and think that he did the Paul Revere statue in Boston, the Appeal to the Spirits in front of the Museum of Fine Arts, or the Angel Moroni on top of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, people just aren't aware of that. He's a very unknown artist, which is unfortunate because he's a phenomenal artist.
Hopefully everybody in town is familiar with Cyrus Dallin, but if they're not, he lived in Arlington from 1900 until his death in 1944 and was a very famous sculptor in his day. He's known for both historical figures and Native American figures, and so we have galleries for both of those, as well as allegorical works and people that he knew personally.
So Dallin departs from the neoclassical style that was most famous at the beginning of the 19th century, and realism becomes an important style of sculpting, which is tricky for a sculptor in particular. Realism is not as grand or as iconic as neoclassical styles, which came before and made sculptors often turn a patriot, like let's say George Washington might need to wear a toga. Well, George Washington doesn't belong in a toga. He was a man of the father of the nation. Everybody knew what George Washington looked like, so why would he need a toga? And so in the same fashion, Dallin emerges as a realist artist who pays attention to, for instance, the details of how horses, musculature and bone, all of it, the skeleton, the structure is all formed, and he's very careful about respecting that detail. It's not as heroic a style, so it created problems for mid-century sculptors to make the sculpture stand out as a monument, to look heroic, and at the same time to convey a certain realism about the person, whether it's Washington or whether it's that iconic Native American on the horse outside the MFA.
Well, I think it has to do mainly with the fact that he was concerned more about common men and the American Indian as well, compared to sculptors of his time that seemed to be more interested in famous people or Civil War generals or presidents and all of that. And Cyrus, I know, did some of that as well. But he lifted up the American Indian, he lifted up common people with his artwork. And I also love his artwork too, especially the hunter, which is right behind us in the park there. And I think his story of coming from Utah as a young man with nothing in his pocket and surviving surviving Boston in what was it, about 1880 or so, and then going off to Paris, but then coming back here and living his life in Arlington, becoming part of the community, and struggling for 57 years to get his Paul Revere statue erected in the city of Boston. And we're very lucky to have it.
What about Dallin's work got me interested? His personal history, having been born in a log cabin and having the talent and drive to take himself all the way to training in Paris, the work he did to minutely historically document the details in his sculptures. If you look at the sculptures on the base of the flagpole, you'll see some examples of that. But his Native American sculptures have real authenticity to them. And he himself, because of his initial upbringing on the frontier, knew many Native Americans. And so I find there to be a vigor and almost visceral appeal and a muscularity to his sculptures that really appeals to me.
Can you tell us about your favorite piece of Dallin's, if you have one?
It's the one with the Native American on the horse, and he's looking up. It just has a lot of emotion in it that I seem to gravitate to.
Well, I enjoy a number of them because of the uniqueness of the flagpole in front of Town Hall. I'll just give that a boost because it actually contains 5 sculptures. The one of the early Pilgrim mother teaching her child to read from the Bible and the interplay between the faces of the mother and the child and the quality, the lifelike quality where you almost feel like she could stand up with this child and walk away is extraordinary, and it should be better known.
But if the museum has such a diverse set of his pieces, whether it's Native American or some of his other works, he has low relief sculpture. His pieces are phenomenal, and they're all over Arlington. I mean, his work is spread across the community. So it's just
you don't even have to go to the museum.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. But the museum is a gem. I think that the town is fortunate to have the museum here. I think that the museum has taken a position nationwide as a repository for some of his phenomenal art there. And so I think that other museums around the country are probably somewhat jealous of the kind of pieces that are here in Arlington. So if you're from Arlington and you're watching this, you need to do yourself a favor and
mosey on over
because it's worth the take. It's a fabulous take.